So a lot of times the difference between the best Muslims and normal Muslims is just productivity. It's just how much stuff they get done. I want you to imagine yourself on the day of judgment because everybody will know what their scales looks like. And if you think about it, the thing that's going to make your scales heavy is your productivity. It's going to be how much ibadah you do and how much time you actually, instead of wasting, you spend productively. Now, especially if you're a teenager like me or a young adult, getting into those adult years, especially as a man, you need to start taking responsibility. I mean, if we look at the Sahaba, for example, they didn't really have the idea of a teenager. They just said when you hit puberty, you're basically a man and you have to start working or at least getting into that idea and habit of gaining responsibility. Now, I used to be the type of person who wasted so much time, especially on YouTube, social media, stuff that you probably struggle with, right? But I researched many things according to the Sunnah of how to stop laziness and how to become a productive Muslim. And there are a few very important things that you need to understand. Now, I want to give you the most important things that actually helped me. And of course, there's probably a million different things, but there's only a few things that really, really are 90% of the improvement. And inshallah, you can actually benefit from it. Now, the number one thing you could do for your productivity is start your day right after Fajr. And this is actually in the Sunnah according to the Prophet ﷺ. Basically, the time right after Fajr, a lot of people take this time to sleep. And I used to be like that, actually. I used to always sleep right after Fajr because I would just be so tired, right? But if you actually have that discipline to get through it, you'll realize that this time has the most barakah in it. I mean, you probably had a day before where you actually started your day after Fajr, and especially you worked right after Fajr. Maybe you had to do an important task, maybe you had to study or whatever it is, but you realize on the day that you start your work right after Fajr, you got so much work done. And this is something that every single Muslim will attest to, and even non-Muslims, right? Even non-Muslims that are successful in terms of money or wealth or whatever you want to think of, they even talk about how waking up early in the morning and starting work early is important. And so the most actionable thing I can tell you is choose the most important task of your whole day, or maybe the 3 most important tasks. And then when you wake up, do those 3 tasks, or the most important task at least, as soon as possible, right after Fajr. Maybe for you, that's memorizing Quran. In fact, memorizing Quran is one of the best things you can do right after Fajr. Because this time, you're fresh, your mind is basically straight after waking up. So it's going to be very easy to memorize and gain knowledge. But what you need to know is there's a prerequisite to doing this, which is having the task that you need to do in the first place and being clear on your goals, your ambitions, and the tasks that you need to do. In fact, this is probably one of the most important pieces of advice you need to internalize if you want to improve yourself as a Muslim, because you need to be very clear on what your goals are. What I would recommend you to do is constantly visualize your dream life and ask yourself, what do you truly want in life, right? Think about the life that you want and think about your goals. And then constantly have that vision in your head and remind yourself of it. Now, what's interesting is that the Quran actually does this. I mean, if you read the Quran, especially with the English translation, you'll understand that Allah constantly talks about the people of Jannah and the description of Jannah, right? And why does He do this? It's because to understand what your goal is, right? Because everyone's goal at the end of the day is Jannah. So when you have a description of what that dream life is, what that dream is of Jannah, then you're going to be much more motivated to go towards that. So we can extract this important principle from the Quran and apply it to our own lives. We need to understand what our dream life is. For you, it might be something different. For you, maybe it's wealth and riches. Then you want to have that idea in your head and constantly remind yourself of it. And in a similar way, Allah constantly talks about the people of Jahannam and constantly gives that as a reminder. Now, after that, what's super important is enjoying the work you do. This is a secret that a lot of successful people have, even non-Muslims, is that instead of, having to discipline through the work, they actually enjoy it, right? So that way it's super easy for them to stay motivated and do the work. Imagine how much better of a life you'd have and how much faster you'd accomplish your goals, whatever they may be, if you actually enjoyed your work. Instead of having to, for example, waking up for Fajr and having to discipline through that action and having to discipline through doing work early in the morning, instead of that, enjoying your work and being motivated to do it every single day. Now, there's 2 ways to accomplish this. The first way is to have a very strong vision and desire to do the work. Now, I touched on this before, but what I would say you need is kind of a mission in life, right? Something that's bigger than yourself that kind of guides you. I guess a North Star, you could say. And then to build a very strong desire for it, you want to constantly remind yourself of it. What I would say is constantly look at something every single day. For example, if it's like your bank account that you're trying to build up, right? Let's say you're trying to get wealthy, look at your bank account every single day, and that will constantly set a reminder for yourself. Or maybe it's the Quran you're trying to memorize. Then in that case, of course, you want to constantly listen to the Quran and constantly look at the Quran, constantly be reading the Quran. And if you look at the Quran, again, you'll realize that there are certain principles that are constantly repeated over and over again. And Islam in general understands that repetition is super, super valuable. A lot of people just constantly only like to read new stuff, for example. Maybe they only like to read new books or new videos. They don't understand the value of repetition. But when you look at the Quran, you'll realize that Allah constantly repeats the same messages over and over again. For example, the description of the people of Jannah or the people of Jahannam or the message of Tawheed and so on and so forth. But one thing you want to make sure is that this desire is something that you actually truly desire deep down and something that's not superficial, that's kind of just put onto you due to influence. A lot of people suffer from this actually. For example, a person may want like Bugattis, Ferraris, fast cars, and this kind of lifestyle, not because he actually truly desires it, but because he sees people and people on social media like Andrew Tate or whoever else you could think of constantly flaunting this stuff. But the problem is when you reach this goal, you'll realize that might not be what you truly wanted. So you're kind of trying to fill a void in your heart with something that's never going to fill it. So you want to be very clear and direct on what you want and make sure it's not something that's superficial and something that you actually truly want. And another thing is you want to make sure that it's something that's pleasing to Allah, right? Even if it's making money, you want to make money in a halal way and preferably in a way that's pleasing to Allah. For example, make money through teaching Quran. And of course, you're going to make money that way, but you're also gaining good deeds and hasanat doing that. Now, the next thing is super important, and in my opinion, it's actually underrated, and that's understanding influence and stimulus. See, the reason why you find work boring in the first place is because your baseline stimulus is too high. So most people, their baseline stimulus is all the way up here. But when you look at successful people, especially monetarily, like billionaires or millionaires, then you realize that their baseline stimulus is here. And that's why they find work a lot easier. Because we're so used to being overstimulated with things like social media, with things like YouTube. But when you cut that away, your baseline stimulus will go down. Now, when you do work, for example, your stimulus level that work gives you is like maybe here in the middle. But the stimulus that YouTube social media gives you is all the way up here. So when you overindulge on YouTube, social media, your baseline stimulus goes all the way up here, and that means that the work stimulus is not going to be stimulating to you anymore. But for a person who's not overindulged in YouTube or social media, who's all the way down here, for example, the work stimulus is going to be here, which means they're actually going to find it stimulating. And that means that they're not going to find it boring. They're actually going to find it enjoyable. So I know I just yapped for a long time, but what I'm trying to say is that when you overstimulate yourself with YouTube, social media, binging on these things, then your baseline stimulus gets too high and you find work boring because you're used to YouTube and social media. But when you cut that out, you're used to not having YouTube or social media or these stimuli, then you'll be a lot more stimulated by doing work. And I actually saw this in my life. I'm not someone who completely cut out YouTube or social media, but when I drastically reduced it, I realized that it was so much more fun to do work. It was so much more enjoyable. And it was also a lot easier. And as a result, I did a lot more work just naturally because I found it more enjoyable. Now, the last point I want to tell you, and this is something that I say every single video, but I can't understate it, is to spam dua. Of course, no success comes without the will of Allah. So there's no reason why you shouldn't be spamming dua as much as possible. And I would recommend you do this in sujood, maybe just at any single time you can imagine. Ask Allah to make your laziness go away and ask Allah to make you a lot more productive. And also ask Allah to give you tawfiq on your goals. And lastly, what I want to tell you is there's one dua that really, really helped me break laziness and anxiety and a bunch of other things. And I'm going to show that on the screen. Anyways, that's all I have for this video. Make sure to check out Clean Islamic Streetwear in the description. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.